In the late 18th century, France was the most populous and prestigious nation in Europe, a cultural superpower defined by grand palaces and refined nobility. But this image of stability was a thin veneer. Underneath the gold leaf, the structural foundations of the state were beginning to buckle. King Louis XVI inherited a treasury drained by a century of global warfare and aristocratic extravagance. By the 1780s, the monarchy was functionally bankrupt, having spent heavily to support the American Revolution, while the previous king's debts continued to accrue interest. This chart represents the three estates, a division of society dating back to the Middle Ages. The tiny top tiers are the clergy and nobility, who owned the vast majority of the land and wealth. The bottom tier represents everyone else, the third estate, who lacked any political voice despite making up 98% of the population. Because the nobility and clergy enjoyed total tax exemptions, the entire financial burden of the nation fell on the peasants and the working class. This tax pressure arrived at the worst possible moment. A series of poor harvests had already caused the price of bread to soar, leaving millions of French citizens unable to afford basic food. To the ministers in Versailles, the problem was a technical budget deficit. To the people in the streets, it was a matter of survival. A state that could not tax the rich and could no longer feed the poor had reached a point of structural impossibility. In a final attempt to stave off bankruptcy, Louis XVI summoned the Estates General in May 1789. It was a desperate political gamble. This representative body had not been called into session for 175 years. The assembly was deadlocked almost immediately. Under the traditional rules, each estate received only one vote. This allowed the clergy and nobility to consistently join forces and block any tax reforms proposed by the Third Estate, regardless of how many people those reforms represented. Rejection led to rebellion. The Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly, the legitimate representatives of the people. When the king tried to shut them down, they occupied a royal indoor tennis court and swore they would not leave until they had written a constitution for France. This oath effectively ended the age of absolute monarchy. For the first time, a group of common citizens had claimed that political authority came from the people, not the divine right of a king. The political standoff turned into a physical conflict on July 14, 1789. Convinced the king was preparing to use his troops to crush the new assembly, an angry Parisian mob stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress and armory. They didn't just want to free prisoners, they wanted the gunpowder stored inside. News of the fall of the Bastille rippled through the countryside, sparking the Great Fear. Across France, peasants armed themselves and attacked the chateaux of their landlords, specifically targeting the archives that held the records of their feudal debts and labor obligations. The National Assembly was forced to respond to the chaos in the streets. In a series of emergency sessions known as the August Decrees, they legally abolished the entire feudal system, ending the tithes, noble privileges, and personal serfdom that had defined French life for centuries. By October, bread shortages had reached a crisis point in Paris. Thousands of working-class women, carrying pikes and kitchen knives, marched 12 miles through the rain to the Palace of Versailles to confront the king directly. The mob breached the palace gates and forced the royal family to leave Versailles forever. Louis XVI was escorted back to Paris and installed in the Tuileries Palace, where he was effectively a hostage of the Parisian public. In just a few months, the center of gravity in France had shifted. The king was no longer the master of his own palace, and the assembly had learned that the credible threat of street violence could achieve legal reforms that debate alone could not. With the debts still mounting, the National Assembly turned to the only remaining source of wealth, the Catholic Church. They nationalized 10% of all French land, the church's entire holding, and sold it at auction to back a new state currency called the assignat. The assembly then passed the civil constitution of the clergy, which turned priests into elected state employees. This forced every member of the clergy to swear an oath of loyalty to the government over the Pope, a move that deeply divided the French population, particularly in the religious rural provinces. In June 1791, King Louis XVI made a desperate attempt to reclaim control. He and his family fled Paris in the middle of the night, disguised as servants and heading for the border, hoping to meet up with loyalist military forces and foreign allies. They were recognized at a checkpoint in the town of Varennes and brought back to Paris in silence. For the public, the king's flight was proof of his treachery. He was no longer seen as a father figure, but as a fugitive who had tried to abandon his nation to foreign invaders. By capturing the king and dismantling the independent power of the church, the revolutionaries had removed the two central pillars of traditional French society. They had effectively dismantled the old world before they had a clear plan for the new one. In January 1793, the National Convention voted to execute Louis XVI. He was no longer a king, but citizen Louis Capet. He was led to the guillotine and beheaded in a public square, an act that sent shockwaves through every royal court in Europe. France was now at war with a coalition of European monarchies in facing violent internal rebellions. This atmosphere of constant threat bred a lethal paranoia, where every setback on the battlefield was seen as the work of spies and traitors within. Into this vacuum stepped Maximilien Robespierre and the Jacobins. They argued that terror was a necessary tool of virtue, and they seized absolute control through the Committee of Public Safety to purge the nation of anyone suspected of disloyalty to the revolution. The resulting reign of terror saw thousands executed without trial. The government attempted a total de-Christianization of France, replacing the Gregorian calendar with a secular one, and stripping churches of their religious symbols in an effort to force a new, unified republican identity. The revolution had turned inward. In the effort to defend its gains from external enemies, the new republic had created a state that survived by consuming its own citizens. The paranoia eventually turned on the leaders themselves. In July 1794, Robespierre was arrested and executed by the same machine he had used on his rivals. His death marked the end of the most radical phase of the revolution. In 1795, an exhausted France attempted to stabilize under a new, five-man executive government called the Directory. They worked to restore order, ending the mass executions and attempting to fix a collapsed economy after years of total upheaval. The Directory eventually gave way to the rise of Napoleon, yet the legal changes of the 1790s could not be undone. Even after the return of order, the feudal dues were gone and the old tax exemptions remained dead. The revolution had successfully transformed millions of people from subjects of a crown into citizens of a nation.